Greetings, salutations, namaste, and welcome. This drop is going to focus on the upcoming eclipses. So hopefully the sound will be better articulated than the last couple of drops. And yeah, Mercury is out of retrograde. So I kind of didn't fulfill my promise of getting a drop out before Mercury was out of retro, but it is literally right now in stationary position coming out of retrograde. So that's as close to the fire as I wanted to play this week. But yeah, lots to say on this one. If you're interested in any of the mythology behind eclipses, I'm not going to talk as much about that in this drop, but I did do another eclipse drop several months ago. So if you want to check out kind of what's behind some different cultures' interpretations of eclipses, check those out. This is going to be more of a cosmic weather forecast because of the fascinating interplay of the transits that are happening and how that might be utilized to interpret how the eclipse will function and reveal itself overall. So let's get into it. So a quick word about the shirt. It is Navratri, and this is one of the only things I own that has orange or red, and this is the day for that color on Navratri. So happy Navratri, everyone. By the way, I don't practice Hinduism. I study their culture and by way of Vedic astrology and honor and respect the customs accordingly where I can. So please forgive me if I ever seem like I'm, some sort of half-ass religious figure. I'm not. I honor all religions and spirituality. But in that vein, this shirt actually is a very special shirt given to me by a very special person to whom I'm sending all the love and healing vibes. And this is done by a Navajo designer. And I'm not sure. This is the anarchy symbol, or known as the anarchy symbol. And I'm not sure if that has any direct correlation to the Navajo culture. I'll have to check with my sources. But I do definitely know there's a lot of symbols and icons and different cultural tropes that have been misinterpreted and simple words that have been misinterpreted, anarchy being one of them. Which is, in its truest meaning, is the absence of rules and regulations. So everyone just translates that to chaos. But in actuality, anarchy is the concept that all civilization was born under originally, because it all had to be done based on an individual interaction with another individual, a sort of bartering system. And this is really where we get karma from. It's the individual interaction between energetic bodies that creates karmic energy. And this is actually a really good segue to the eclipse talk, because the eclipse happens in Svati Nakshatra in Libra. Now, Svati is pretty much the ultimate nakshatra of the individual. It's in Libra, though. So what's this individual doing in the zodiac sign of the pair, at least? Libra is where we come together to make arrangements, whether it's marriage or business partnership or war. And so this is where actually Saturn gets exalted, because Saturn is about making these things structurally and functionally sound. So Saturn is going to come back into this later. But for now, let's think about Svati as the nakshatra that actually is the center of Libra, because in order for there to be a good arrangement between two individuals, that arrangement has to equally suit both individuals. And that is so rare in our society. It's always about one-upsmanship and gamesmanship to get the better advantage. So this is really where a lot of that karma gets created. One other quick thing about Swati. I am in South Florida, and we just had a hurricane come through, and I was in, fortunately, uh, a place where it didn't hit directly. So blessings to all those that were affected. This hurricane actually happened on Swati when the moon was in Swati. This is kind of a special nakshatra when it comes to rain. I think I heard this from Arjun Pai, Dr. Pai, that there's a bird that only drinks rainwater on Swati, or rainwater that comes on Swati. So I thought that was such a beautiful notion, and I went to research this and typed in Swati birds and couldn't find anything except a YouTube user, which I'm going to throw this brother's YouTube channel up and give him some dap because this is so cool. He's got something called Swati birds, so I don't know if he collects Swati birds or what. So I got some Swati birds there, and also got some footage of the white ibis, which is very common in this area. All taking they're all getting some water from the hurricane. So, or I guess they're getting the insects that came up. Anyhow, so that's enough with my Dr. Dolittle thing. So I'm mentioning Swati a lot because that's where the solar eclipse is happening in Libra. The lunar eclipse actually happens in Aries in the nakshatra of Bharani. And I'm going to probably end up doing another drop closer to that date because lunar eclipses tend to reveal information or have their activation very close to the date of, whereas solar eclipses, they reverberate from thousands of years back. So more directly, you can see activation points of the solar eclipse based on when the last solar eclipse was and when the future solar eclipses are, especially if they're in that sign. And we're going to have, this is the last eclipse cycle in this axis of Aries and Libra for this year, and we will have 2 more in 2023. So that will be 4 eclipses total in this axis of Libra and Aries. So what causes an eclipse are the north and south nodes of the moon, Rahu and Ketu. When they're present and there is a new moon and a full moon in the same sign that Rahu and Ketu are in, this creates the eclipse cycle. And I had mentioned in a previous drop that I believe Rahu and Ketu are sort of correspondences to the sun and the moon, which are luminaries for this matrix. And Rahu and Ketu are, they retrograde. So they're always in a retrograde orbit, whereas the moon and the sun are the only things that are always in a clockwise orbit. All the other planets will have a retrograde pattern at some point. So Rahu and Ketu function more like the sun and the moon than they do any other elements in our solar system. So for this reason, I sort of deduced that this is how we connect with our past and future lives based on retrogrades. So when planets retrograde, they're actually kind of getting in synchronization with the luminaries of our soul, Rahu and Ketu. So once again, I digress. So a typical new moon finds the sun rendering the moon invisible. This is where the waning moon becomes crescent and then eventually becomes the new moon where you can't see the moon at all. And this is what is known as combustion, actually. So when any planet gets close to the sun, by degree, it becomes less visible to the eye, and therefore that planetary energy becomes more vague or unresponsive during those combustion periods. Harder to tap into, which is not to say that it can't be tapped into, but it's really about finding those more subtle energies in which to focus, on which to focus. So what happens with, and I actually am going to throw up some footage I shot of when the moon was full and what it looks like, because the moon and the sun are basically looking at each other across the zodiac, as it were. And it's just fascinating to see that out in real life. So you can't see the moon though when it comes back around to the new moon stage where it's combust with the sun, and therefore this is actually where we get very emotionally vulnerable is around new moons, and new moons become very powerful for magic and for any kind of occult arts for this reason, because the subtle energies become more of a powerful element than the more overt energies. Those who have debilitations in their chart, retrogrades in their chart, combustions in their chart, will actually probably find, you know, positive, more positive things happen in their life from these transits when they play out, for what it's worth. It won't always be the most obvious, and it certainly won't always be easy. But as I'm always saying, everyone has hardship, everyone has difficulty they have to face. And what it's about are how the planets are arranged to help you face those difficulties. So what happens with an eclipse is really a reset. And I feel like I've used that term a lot, reset, this year. And I'm just throwing that out there. But this is definitely a reset. And what a new moon does when it comes into an eclipse cycle is it kind of switches that role play, where the moon, instead of being blocked by the sun, actually blocks the sun. And the reason why is because of the influence of Rahu and Ketu, the nodes of the moon, which I've also mentioned, I think, have a correspondence to some cataclysms that maybe happened in our solar system, having to do with the asteroid belt, which a lot of people, the Sumerians, I'll say, not a lot of people, the Sumerians specifically associate with Tiamat. And I'm only bringing this up because I'm doing a bigger drop soon on the moon. And one of the things is the Sumerians believed that the moon was actually brought into orbit. And those who they are associated with did so. More on that in the future drop. So, okay, one more crazy fact before I talk about the dates of the eclipse, which I haven't even mentioned this far into the drop. The sun and the moon, this is something I learned recently, from an angular perspective, are exactly the same size. So this is why these eclipses can happen. And this also doesn't happen anywhere else, apparently, in the universe, that this individual is aware of, who gave me this information. So, I'm going to talk about the full moon eclipse a little bit more in a future drop, and just kind of focus on the solar this time around. I'll just say that the one that happens in November, which is November 8th, is the full moon lunar eclipse, and will be in Bharani nakshatra, which is the nakshatra that's sort of known as the judgment, ruled by the god of death, Yama. So the fact that this is falling on the American election day is certainly Bharani-like, and let's see what happens. Okay, so around a lunar eclipse, there's a lot more localized energy that day, so that's why I want to see what happens in the next month before I talk in depth about that. For now, we'll focus on the sun in Libra, which is the sun's debilitation point. And I did a audio challenge drop where I talked a lot about debilitations, and how this is a term derived from the term Nietzsche, which in Jyotish means like debilitated. This is what we get debilitated from, but actually has many different meanings. And the main gist of Nietzsche is low. So I correlated this concept to the idea of frequency, and how there's certain low frequencies that are more subtle, like Earth's frequencies, and higher frequencies that are obvious, like a musical instrument we play. And this is actually even more well articulated when you look at where the sun and the moon debilitate, which are in Libra and Scorpio respectively. And this is the lowest point on the ecliptic that the planets travel. So this is where the infamous, winter solstice that Christmas and many other ancient sacred holidays are based on, because this is where ancient cultures would observe that the sun would actually disappear for a few days around December 23rd, the winter solstice, because it's hitting the lowest point of the ecliptic and it's coming back up after December 25th, the rising sun, as it were. So this is a very beautiful trajectory to look at this concept of Nietzsche from, because this is literally the lowest point for these two luminaries. Finally, the date reveal for the solar eclipse will be October 25th. And this is a little Halloween spooky eclipse cycle, because the next one is 2 weeks later on the 8th. So we have Halloween in between there. And lots of planets moving, coming out of retro and doing all sorts of crazy stuff in the interim. So what is going to happen during eclipses, especially around the lunar eclipse? Information that might have been held back will be revealed. And this is also the nature of what happens after retrogrades. So you might see where I'm going with this, because I'm talking to you the day that Mercury comes out of retrograde, which is October 2nd. And Saturn comes out of retrograde October 23rd, 2 days before the solar eclipse. Saturn is very key to understanding what's happening here, because it's throwing a 10th aspect onto Libra, which is its exaltation aspect. And this is the karmic aspect, let's say. So Ketu being our karmic body, Saturn being in very good dignity in Capricorn, and having just gone through this beautiful Nichiban Raj Yoga that it created for Jupiter, that I've been talking incessantly about. This is going to be the jumpstart of Ketu as our ancestral body, bringing out innovation from our karmic values, our karmic past, our ancestral past, our cultural values will come back into play on the world landscape. That's just my opinion. So the sun was in Aries when we had our last eclipse cycle, so this is where it's exalted. And now it will be in Libra, where it is in Nietzsche, or in the English debilitation, or at its low point, at its low frequency. I'm going to have to come up with better terminology. Now, Saturn is the sort of opposition of the sun, and this is the house where Saturn gets exalted, Libra. Saturn is not only casting a 10th aspect that's creating very strong energy here, but it's also forming a Kendar yoga, and is in Kendra, which means 4 places away from Aries and Libra. So this is a very stabilizing energy. Whatever happens in the near or long term will be for the benefit of stabilizing society overall, is where I'm going with this. The sun represents the government, represents authority figures. So Saturn coming out of retrograde and having all this influence on this eclipse, what might happen is a lot of the griminess that people have been trying to get away with for the past several months while Saturn was in retrograde, while Jupiter was in retrograde, it's going to start seeping out into the sunlight. We will, as a society and cultures, have the opportunity to see new information and old information in new ways that will reflect very poorly on governments, very poorly on authority figures. And this will create a new energy to revolutionize these instruments of our society. What's really even more fascinating about Svati is when you correlate it to the astronomy itself. Svati, as a constellation, is very close to Arcturus. And this is, I'm actually going to do a drop on extraterrestrials and nakshatras. And the Arcturians are one of these ET races that people have claimed to have interacted with, and just happens to be one of the more prominent nakshatras. And now where I'm going with this is Edgar Cayce, who you may or may not know is a figure from the middle of the 20th century, and is a genuine, authentic prophet and seer, intuitive. He was able to diagnose people's health issues remotely through psychic intuition, through going into trance states, and got a lot of information about Atlantis from his downloads, and where this ties in to Sfati is Cayce believed that Arcturus was our gateway out of this realm. So I'll just leave that as a cliffhanger, and I'll go more into that on a future drop. Since the eclipse in the solar eclipse is happening in Libra, it's important to understand what the ruler of Libra, Venus, is doing in this. First of all, it's creating a Nichibang Raj Yoga for the sun. Almost as soon as the sun becomes debilitated, it claws. And Venus swoops into its own house, and this is how one of the ways that a Nichibang Raj Yoga is formed. So a Nietzsche planet becomes even more powerful to the point where it's as powerful, definitely, as an exaltation when it's a Nichibang Raj Yoga. So this is a little bit more difficult, though, because Venus is in combustion. So Venus is going to increase its combustion, meaning its proximity to the sun, as we get closer and closer to the lunar eclipse, at which point Mercury will have joined Libra, and these two planets will be in very hard combustion to the sun on the lunar eclipse. Adding to the sort of frenzy of unpredictable energy, we'll say, is Mars, the ruler of Aries, which is in retrograde as of the end of October. Check the date. October 30th, I think. I'll throw it up there if I'm wrong. And this is going to continue as a retrograde into January. So we will get some results in November, but the repercussions and the true reverberations will ripple out well into March, when Mars finally catches back up to where it is going to go retrograde. Pretty much where it's transiting throughout October. So it's considering all these factors that an eclipse usually will reveal information, and retrograde planets will also do the same thing once they come out of retrograde. You have Mercury and Saturn both coming out of retrograde in October. Jupiter in November comes out of retrograde, while Mars is going into retrograde and comes out in January. So these waves will just continue to ebb and flow, and we'll try and keep our head above the cosmic waters. Okay, so to wrap up, the full moon lunar eclipse on the 8th of November will be really unique. As I said, there's a role play reversal that happens when there's an eclipse, because the sun is usually visible during the new moon, and the moon is invisible, and vice versa. The full moon is at its brightest when it's full, but during an eclipse, this will become the opposite, where the full moon is darkened. So not only will the moon be darkened by this eclipse, but Mercury and Venus will also be very in hard combustion, so not visible. In other words, we'll have the sun having its day. However, it will be being watched over by Saturn. So there will be this interplay between Saturn, the common man, the individual, and the sun, the government. I mean, on election day, are you kidding me? You can't make this up. Anyhow, this is why astrology is so fascinating to me. So I will say the best thing to do during eclipses is Kriya Yoga. And strangely, I messed my knee up while doing Kriya Yoga. And I don't even know why I said that, because it's like I shouldn't be saying that. It's almost like I took it for granted at the moment that I was doing it. And, it's shit happens. But that's the point. I'm not going to stop doing Kriya Yoga because it has really changed my life. And particularly on eclipses, this is a very powerful practice. All tantric, occult, physical arts, pranayama breathing get magnified and amplified on eclipses. This is a way to elevate one's soul to that Bodhi plane of transcendental understanding, moksha. So that's all I got. And blessings, love you all, and be back soon with some lunacy.